In this short tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can go from these types of imports where we have this long, messy relative URL path to these commented out imports. We're going to implement this where we can attach a namespace at the front of the import and simplify this vastly. So this is great for organizing a large project. I think it's just also a really cool feature of TypeScript that we can use. In addition, I'm also going to show you the basic folder structure that I use for all of my new projects. Just as of right now, this is definitely subject to change and it evolves over time according to the type of framework I'm using and whatnot. But I think it's an overall pretty organized standard way of starting. It will at least get you 90% of the way there. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is figure out how to get this working. And the way we do this is actually through a feature of TypeScript, and you can find it in the modules section of the compiler options of the tsconfig reference. So when we set up TypeScript, there is this file over here. We'll open it up. It's called tsconfig.json, and you can see that with my setup right here, this is all of the default options. And let me just quickly show you how I got all of this. I've got a Next.js app set up, and the way I did this was just through the steps here on the Tailwind's page of setting up Next.js with TypeScript and Tailwind. So you just create the Next app, initialize it with TypeScript, initialize Tailwind CSS, configure Tailwind CSS, put those in your global CSS, and then you're ready to run the project. So yarn dev, and you can see I've just got a very basic web app that generates a random number. Simple enough. But all of these options in the tsconfig have been created as a result of this bootstrapping that we did with this automatic generator. So that's all we've done here. And to make this work, what we're going to do is actually add that paths feature that we're looking at in the tsconfig reference. So if we click paths in the modules section, it says this is a series of entries which remap imports to lookup locations relative to the base URL. So in other words, what this means is if we go to tspaths, we're saying instead of this, we're going to remap it to something more like this. And it's actually relatively easy to do. So all we have to do is in the compiler options, come down and give it a base URL. And we're just going to give it a period because it's relative. Our tsconfig file is sitting in the base directory of this entire app. So that's where we're going to put our base URL. And the reason we knew to do this is because it says this must be specified if paths is specified. So this is the relative path to where those mappings are going to look. So now we'll throw in a paths property, and this accepts an object which has a bunch of different path keys. So if we wanted to get this working right here, at org/client/shared, all we need to do is this. So we say at org client shared, and I'll show you why we're doing this specific path in a second. And then we need to give it an array, because in theory what you can do is you can look at this namespace and path, and you can actually map several locations within your project to this. Right now, all we need to do is map a one-to-one mapping. So if you see in the source folder, the lib folder, client, and then shared, I have some components and hooks. Now, if I wanted to export that entire library, all I need to do is make a new file called index.ts. This is a pipe export file, and I'm going to say export all from components and then export all from hooks. We might get an error here. Nope, I think we're all good. So all we're doing is exporting all the files from these directories, and as you'll see in components, I have another index file that exports, let's see, we're going to export all from the button file, and then the button file is going to just export a basic button component. Okay, So that's all we need to do. And now what we're going to do is actually type that in. So relative to the base URL, we're going to look into source, then lib, then we're going to look into client, and then shared. And since we have this index file, it's going to look at shared and export everything from that. So if we just provide index.ts, then it's going to remap that entire directory to this path. So theoretically, if we come back and comment out that button and comment in this one, you can see that it's working. And if we save and go back to our application, hopefully it loads just fine. And it does. We're able to generate a random number with that button because this path here is now being remapped to the source lib client shared directory, which exports all the components and hooks, which also export individual files. So that's kind of just an overview of the feature. Now, let me take a quick break to show you the overall structure that we have here. So whenever I set up a new project, the first thing that I do, especially with Next.js, is I will take the pages folder, which Next.js allows you to put it under the src directory just for nesting and organizational purposes. So I put pages there instead of the top level directory. So that's one thing I do. And then I'll create a lib folder. And this lib folder is going to have 3 subfolders. So we have client, server, and shared. The client folder is meant for only code that is allowed to run client side. With Next.js, you have this concept of server side and client side. With other frameworks, you also have this concept. They're just not so intertwined. So I like to separate out the folders so I know what I'm importing from these different libraries. So I have client, server, and shared. Shared is going to be anything that can be used within client or server. So it's code that's safe on both sides. And you can see that I've created a number utils, which we'll come back to. And then client, I'll also have a shared folder, which is going to have components and hooks. And then I also might add maybe some utils or providers for React providers and context. But anyway, this is the basic structure. And then I use a folder by feature organizational strategy, which basically means that all of my features that can be represented by, a bunch of different UI components or server components, I shouldn't say server components, server files, those will be grouped into a feature rather than what we've done here in the shared client folder. Where is that? Right here, where we have components and hooks. I like this directory structure for just the shared file or folder, but I don't like it for an entire directory because I think it's much easier to develop when all of your files related to a single feature are in the same place. So for example, let's say that I had like a homepage feature and I had a provider, a hook, and a couple of components, I'd put them all in a folder that I'd create that says like homepage, and I'd put like all of those things in that one directory. So anyways, that's kind of how I organize this. And I'll open this all up so that you can see everything. On the back end, I'll have some services and utils, so on and so forth. So you can pause the video, kind of just look at this starting structure that I have. Let me just open it all up. So this is kind of the starting structure that I use for, say, a Next.js project. Now, to finish this video off, let's complete these path imports. So we've got one of them working right here, but what if we wanted to add the shared utils? Just for some practice, we'll go back to our tsconfig and let's copy this because this is the path that we want to use. So we'll add another entry to our paths called this, and then we'll set an array of relative paths that we need to put in here to map to this. And what we're trying to do is map getRandomNumber, which exists in the number utils file of the shared utils folder or directory structure. And you can see I'm just exporting a getRandomNumber function. It's very simple from the number utils. So this is also going to be exported from the index file. And if we go back to our tsconfig, all we need to do is track down the source, lib, and then let's see where this is. This should be in the shared, right? So lib and then shared. And then it also, we need to add utils because it's in the utils folder, and then index.ts. So that would be the mapping for shared utils. Now let's save that, go back to our TS paths, uncomment this, and now we should be able to delete those ugly imports. And now we have getRandomNumber and button being imported from these nice looking namespaced paths. And I think this is just a very nice way to organize your project, and it really comes into effect when you have a ton of different libraries that you're working with in the same folder. So, or in the same project, sorry. So let's just make sure it works, and it does. We've got a random number generator, woohoo, very exciting. But hopefully this video, I know it's very short and went through it kind of rapid fire, but hopefully this helps you out and gives you an idea of how I might organize a project and how I set up this, this really nice namespaced path import feature with TypeScript. Until next time, I'll see you later.